Hey reader, this is Centaur. So today we're doing a bit of a different kind of video. Today we're looking at a unit to see how it's changed going from 2nd edition to 3rd edition and whether or not the change is good. And that unit is the lowly machine gun team. Now I'm going to try really hard to get these focused in, but I'm going to try, guys. Don't hold me to it. Okay. So in this case, we're going to take a look at a couple things. These are just 5 examples of what you might be looking at when you're looking at a machine gun team in various stages of completeness, based on really how close I am to going to a tournament with any of them, if I'm being honest. But we're going to take a look at the 3 different team-based weapons that fall into the machine gun category that were coming over from 2nd edition and how they've changed going into 3rd and whether or not the problems that we had with those were fixed. Now, for those of you who didn't join us in 2nd edition, now, in general, when you're looking at competitive lists that were present in 2nd edition, you rarely saw a machine gun team. Sometimes you would see this light machine gun team, MG34, as I recall, from the Germans, mostly because it was the same cost as all the others. By virtue of being a German light machine gun, it also had the same number of shots as your average machine gun team from other countries. But it could move and shoot. It didn't have the fixed property. So it meant it was a good base of fire, it provided really good support, was reasonably reliable. You got a good number of shots for the amount of points you were paying. But in addition to that, you also had the benefit of it being a mobile firing platform, so harder to range in on with a mortar. You then had these medium machine gun teams, which were like ubiquitous from starter armies. But when you looked at armies that were playing for competition, they were like nowhere. You would see them in basically no list at all. And then you had the heavy machine gun team, and I'm not going to lie, the heavy machine gun team was one of the worst units in 2nd edition. The rate of fire wasn't good, damage potential was fine, but it had such a small ceiling that it really couldn't do very much to enemy units. There wasn't really a way for you to be able to stack up multiples of them in a single army, and they costed more than a machine gun team, even though they only had 3 shots instead of 5 shots. So you didn't see them much. All of these, however, saw changes going into 3rd edition, and that's the reason for our video today. So we'll start out with the fastest one, which is the light machine gun team. So far in 3rd edition, we have not seen it return. It is not present in the German army. That might actually be historically accurate. I don't recall whether or not light machine guns were ever used just as solo independent units or whether they were always tied to a squad, but if they were not, then that would make sense as to why they're missing. It makes me interested to see whether or not when the British book, which is, I believe, the next book that's coming down the line as of this recording, whether they will have maybe the Bren gun as a potential separate light machine gun team, which would be very interesting and would provide a kind of more unique way of playing the Bren gun for British players. Because as I recall, that one was used as its own separate weapon outside of squads. So, or at the very least, that's what I feel like I remember from, Jadotsville? I can't remember. There was a fight that involved a Bren gun team kind of holding the line for everybody else. So at least for now, the LMG team does not exist in 3rd, so we can move past that one. Similarly, I think the heavy machine gun team probably gets one of the top awards for most improved player, so to speak, coming out of 2nd edition and into 3rd. It got its shots increased from 3 to 6, which makes it huge as a potential upgrade because it really hasn't changed much in terms of cost. It's basically the same. It's just sitting now at 6 shots instead of 3 shots. It also added an extra 12 inches worth of range to get up to 48, which is awesome. So on the whole, I've found there's a reason why I 3D printed these guys. This is, by the way, this is the pintle-mounted heavy machine gun that comes with the 1942 First to Fight Guadalcanal Kickstarter by Studio Historia. I believe on Studio Historia's site, you can find both the physical prints and access to the STLs. I'll go ahead and link that in the description so you guys can take a look. Files are great. They print really well. My paint job doesn't do a very good job on them because I haven't even finished these guys yet. I was just kicking around ideas for what base structure I might do. Since it's pintle mounted, I thought about maybe doing like some sandbags or something like that around it. I know the meta is not to base them on the thing, but yeah, I don't know. Sometimes with certain weapons, it just works better, especially when they got those wide tripods. It just works better to base them on something bigger. So here we are. So on the whole, I think if you have access to a heavy machine gun team, which is not that many, but it's more than you'd expect. Belgium can take it. There are a couple of other minor nations that can take heavy machine guns in addition to medium machine guns. As an infantry-based team weapon, it might actually be worth looking into. So take a look at that. It'll shred anything that's not armored. So soft-skinned vehicles that are trying to transport up troops. If you leave them on ambush with the ability to cover a side, that could be a great way of taking on outflankers that are coming in from a particular line or on one specific side of the board. They can be a great way of shredding infantry, especially infantry that are that are out of cover. So, there's a lot of options here that you might consider. The medium machine gun team, which is of course most of the machine guns that you're going to see as team weapons in the game. Now, this is where I think things get very interesting. On the one hand, they cost the same as they did in the last edition: 35 points in experience, 50 points regular, 65 points veteran. And they added an extra shot. They're now up to 6 instead of 5 for your average one, which means the Germans are now up to 7. All of that, I think, is good, and I think it does make a good reason to take them. On the one hand, you're still stationary, you're still fixed, right? So you can't move and shoot in the same turn. But at the same time, you're now getting 6 shots for the same cost as 5 men with rifles. You're getting added range, you're getting the extra shot. Sure, you suffer less wounds and you're less mobile. That's true. So there are trade-offs, but I think that's a reasonable trade-off. And the fact that you now have a heavy weapons platoon that's very cheap to take, and you could take quite a few of these. If you're playing Americans, you could take a lot of these. I think there's options. I think there's options out there. As to the utility of them, though, I think we're seeing some benefits to the utility of the MMG team in 3rd edition because of other rules changes. And for that, we're going to zoom out and we're going to go to the battle board because I think it helps to demonstrate this. All right, so over here, we've got my Polish machine gun team, which I've taken to several tournaments and actually had quite a bit of success with. For mischievous and devious reasons of my own, I almost always take one of these. Though recently I do confess I've been putting them on machine gun mounts on trucks instead. But suffice it to say, we've got these guys over here. And then up the line from them, and I really do apologize if I'm making you seasick with this camera work. Sorry about that. We have another machine gun team. In this case, this is an American machine gun team because I'm getting them ready. I've got a narrative event coming up in a couple weeks, and so been working a lot of my Americans right now. Now, these guys, if they were firing at each other in 2nd edition, this would be a complete pillow fight, and basically nothing would happen because they'd have 5 shots. There'd be heavy cover in between both. And so you'd end up with, 3s, 5s, 6s for long range, and only 5 shots means that there's a good chance you're not even doing a pin on a given turn, right? So because of that, not the best. In 3rd edition, though, because long range penalties are now gone, and cover is now applied as a cover save, this is now a very dangerous fight for both of them because these guys are shooting over at the other guys looking for 4s to hit, assuming no pins on them. Maybe pins would bring it up to 5 if they were purchased inexperienced. Then that would bring it up to 6 again. But that would be the worst you'd be looking at is, 5s or 6s. And these guys would also be looking at, 4s, 5s, or 6s, depending on whether or not they were purchased inexperienced or had any pins on them or things like that. But now they're getting 6 shots each, which means realistically, they're probably pinning at least every single turn. And more than that, if you're even slightly above the standard deviation, if you're getting 2 to 3 hits, assuming that you're wounding on 3s or 4s, because I do think veteran is a little wasted on a unit like this that isn't planning on really moving up and taking a position, you could be doing 1 to 2 wounds, which means 1 bad roll of a cover save, which is very possible. Cover saves are very swingy. And you could be rolling for morale for the unit, right? And you could very easily be losing models as you go along. And with no more small team penalty to hit for only having 2 or less models in the unit, you're still just as vulnerable at 3 men as you are at 2 or you are at 1. So, it's not like you're more difficult to hit at that point onwards. So I think in general, the machine gun team is quite a bit more of a lethal weapon. Admittedly, you still got to work past cover saves. You don't get any bonuses to wounds, so you're still not going to be that great against veterans. But at the very least, as a pin-generating machine, I think they're pretty good. And so this begs the question, if you are going to take machine gun teams, how many should you take, and what veterans see? I'll tell you now, probably don't need more than 2 or 3. Probably more like 2. If I was including them, and I haven't included them in too many of my lists, but when I have, I've mostly included them as protection units that I can leave behind to guard something like, an artillery battery or a couple mortars or something like that. Put them, more than 6 inches away by eyeballing it, so that way if somebody has a rocket launcher, they're not going to hit you and somebody else at the same time. But still put them in such a way that they can intercept and cut off an easy attacking line from somebody who might be coming down the line to attack a softer target. So putting them in a position like this is actually quite nice, because anybody trying to use this side corridor or anybody coming across this way, you've got yourself a good option for covering that with your machine gun. Same thing goes from the other side. They're covering the exact same lines, just doing it from this direction. It's also a great way of having a tool that you could potentially use for your backline defense. So in this case, this unit over here does have a pretty good line of sight to pretty much all the way down the line as well, all the way down this side. And similarly for that unit over there, looking down the line this way, right? So what they're really well designed for, I suspect, is to be able to be a versatile defensive and guarding unit. In which case, inexperienced and regular is probably sufficient. But Mortensen's been making the claim, and I think he's probably right. Inexperienced works fine in this case, because again, if you're primarily relying on them just to pin down enemy units and, maybe put a wound or two on some other stuff, it's only 15 points. It's not bad, right? If you're not counting on them for wounds, then a -1 to hit, you're probably still pinning on a given turn. You're probably still getting at least 1 dice that's coming up as a hit. I think he's probably right, especially if you're going to take more than 1. If you're only taking 1, it might be worthwhile just to look into regular, just to make sure that they more reliably do what you're asking them to do. It also means that if somebody does take a shot at you, they're less likely to just remove you. 3s to wound is very easy to do. So, I would just be careful of that. But on the whole, I think it works out. Now, there's one final thing we should probably talk about when it comes to machine gun teams, and that is obviously there's always going to be one unit that's going to remove some of the effectiveness of the machine gun team, and that is the 5-man rifle squad with a light machine gun in the squad, right? Especially if you're looking at something like Germany that's getting that extra shot. There's a legitimate question of, I'm not paying that many points more, 20 points more, and I'm getting potentially almost double the number of shots that I'd get otherwise from just that one weapon. It's not quite, but it's over 50% more shots than you get otherwise. And it's tricky. You're looking at the situation saying, well, this one can't move. It can't also maneuver. I think my recommendation on this, especially for 3rd edition, since we have so many different platoons we can choose from, is to beg the question, what are you building your infantry squads in your rifle section for? Because if you're planning on taking a machine gun squad or two for only 50 points each regular, 35 points each inexperienced, you might not need to dedicate 70 points to a 5-man rifle squad with a light machine gun when you could take 2 medium machine gun teams to cover what that one squad would be trying to do, right? If you imagine you have one unit over here, and then you have another unit in this forest over here, and it's covering that line, and they cost the same as, a unit that can maneuver and fire, but it's only one unit, and sure, it has some extra rifle shots, but not at the same range as a machine gun, then there's I think a solid question that you should be asking, which is, why not just take the machine gun teams? Because the machine gun teams will do basically the same job, effectively. Sure, you have to keep them safe, but they do basically the same job with more bodies for the same cost, effectively, as one machine gun carrying squad. So I would just maybe take a step back, ask yourself that question, because I think what the machine gun team might free you up for is to say, hey, I can actually build my squads to be more versatile and more close combat. Not necessarily saying you want to take submachine guns, assault rifles, things like that all over the place. But if you were thinking about it, it might be a good idea as a means of getting that extra firepower, not to mention a couple of extra order dice, to instead take it as a machine gun team and going that direction instead. Anyway, relatively short video today talking about it. I do think that all 3 have improved going into 3rd edition, and I do think it is worthwhile in as much as you can take them, because obviously we have yet to see what will happen with the light machine gun team. But I think if you have the chance to take them, you should at least try them out. I think we're too early on in 3rd edition to say that they don't work. I think that we're definitely a little too early on in board design for 3rd edition to say that they don't work. I mean, you can notice here from my board, I try to include a lot of different variety. I try to make sure that there are impediments to movement, that you'd have to pay for special rules in order to be able to easily move through things. I try to make sure that there's a good bit of relatively tall cover, right? I mean, here's the team, and some of them are in a standing position. I mean, you can see you can't even see over that wall, right, with that team. So, there's a good bit of line of sight coverage, but still at the same time, if you really wanted to, you could place a team in this doorway and you can see through to the other doorway and beyond until you hit the pig pen. So, there are options, and maybe I'll do another video relatively soon talking about board design, because I think a small series on board design, talking through the options that you get, might be a good worthwhile idea as well. But just suffice it to say, I think the machine gun team is going to come into its own. I'm just going to predict it now. We are going to start seeing machine gun teams coming up at some of the top tables. Maybe not in the ways that you think they are, but definitely as a means of saying, hey, if I was planning on taking a heavy weapons platoon because I wanted some mortars or I wanted extra anti-tank teams, do I want to have to take even more infantry squads and thereby also take a recce platoon? Or can I cut out the recce platoon by instead taking a rifle platoon that's geared toward mobility, and instead take my supporting fire elements in my heavy weapons platoon? And that could save you quite a few points in the long run. So worth looking into. If you have thoughts on this, if you've tried these out in 3rd edition, please let me know down below. I am just getting ready to start my first game that's actually going to use machine gun teams, which is partially the reason why I've been painting a bunch of these up. But yeah, let me know if you have any thoughts down below, and we will talk to you next time.